Hi everybody, welcome to the Food Webs and Energy Transfer EOC review. We're going to start out by talking about the Sunshine State Standard. It's L.17.9, which is to use a food web to identify and distinguish producers, consumers, and decomposers, also to explain the pathway of energy transfer through trophic levels and the reduction of available energy at successive trophic levels. Trophic levels, if you'll remember, are the levels that things consume. You got your producers, your first level consumers, second level consumers, you've heard all that. Those are the trophic levels. Successive trophic levels are the ones right after the other. So you've got your producer level, like grass. Well, what eats grass? That's the successive trophic level. Is like a cow. Well, what eats a cow? That's the next trophic level. And the idea here is the reduction of available energy at successive levels means that at each level past the producer level, there's a lot less energy available. And so we're going to show you that in just a second. But that's a huge thing of what they want you to learn here, is that from one level to the next, a lot of the energy is lost. All right, so for clarification, students will describe the energy pathways through the different trophic levels of a food web or an energy pyramid. We're going to do that, and and we're also going to analyze the movement of matter through the different biogeochemical cycles. We're going to straight to that. We're going to look right here, and I want you to notice that energy. This graph right here shows how energy moves through and then matter is cycled around. We're going to come back to that, but that goes directly from what this says right here, the clarification. Those are the two things that you really need to be able to understand. All right, so let's describe this a little bit. An ecosystem consists of all the organisms living, that's the biotic organisms, all the organisms living in a community, that's all the biotic parts, and all the abiotic parts, such as, temperature, weather, climate, the available nutrients, God, there's just all kinds of things. And trust me, there's a lot more abiotic factors than biotic, and I do mean a lot more. You just have no idea how much abiotic factors there are in an ecosystem. And you can, every time you find one and you think that's it, you can take a look at that one and kind of split it and get even more. So it's kind of crazy, but there's a lot of abiotic factors and not as many biotic factors. Anyway, regardless of an ecosystem size, its dynamics involve two main processes: energy flow and chemical cycling. Energy flows through ecosystems while matter cycles within them. And we're going to show you that. I'm going to take a closer look here in just a minute. Energy and nutrients pass from the primary producers, that's your autotrophs usually, although we are going to talk about a slightly different type of producer today, but it goes from that to the primary consumers, the herbivores, then to the secondary consumers, the carnivores, and then further and further and further. That's what everything does. Energy and nutrients pass through, but then what happens? What happens to all the energy once it goes from one to the other? What happens to all the matter once it goes from one to the other? Let's take a closer look. Now look, the orange represents energy, and as you can see, all of the energy going into this entire system, in this case, comes from the sun. There is a slightly different process in which, instead of the sun, primary producers absorb energy from chemicals. That's a very rare process we'll talk about in just a second, but for the most part, almost all producers on Earth start by absorbing energy from the sun. Okay? So the energy goes in. Now, almost immediately, some of that energy is used and released as heat right back into the atmosphere, and it goes out into space at night. Every time you see one of these little funny looking squiggly orange lines, that means heat is being released. It goes back into the space at night, and then it's gone forever. So primary producers pull energy in and release heat. Now, the energy that they don't release in the form of heat can actually be consumed by the primary consumers. So energy goes to the primary consumers. I mean, that's what we're getting. Whenever I eat an apple, I'm a primary consumer and I'm getting energy from it, right? I'm also getting nutrients. We'll get to that in a minute. But I'm getting energy. And I use that energy, right? And that energy is used to do one of two things. It's either used to make can maintain my metabolic processes, keep me alive, moving around. That creates heat. That heat goes out into space, or I store that energy in the form of fat or something else. I use it to build my body structure, and that energy gets stored for a little while, and then I either use it so it goes back out as heat, or I die, and I either get decomposed or something eats me, right? Either way, that's the only thing that can happen to all the energy I consume. I either use it and it goes out as heat, or something eats me, like a lion, which will be a secondary consumer. Probably in my case, it'll be like a big snake or something. That's my biggest fear in life. Or I get decomposed, and that's the big thing, is the energy goes to the decomposers and they eat me. So, that's just the way that it works. The energy only goes two places. It either goes out in the form of heat because I used it, or I save it in my body structures and something else eats me. And welcome to the, Hakuna Matata. It means no worries, because guess what? You're going to get eat. Um, and if you'll notice, all of the energy flows through that way, from the primary producers to the primary consumers to the secondary consumers to the tertiary consumers, and there can be more. It can go higher than this. We'll talk about that in a minute. But the energy then all flows to the the decomposers. That's what this whole thing is here. Don't get caught up in this. These are all just decomposers. Or they get used and the energy is released by heat. And notice even the decomposers use it, and they release the energy. The energy ultimately all gets released back into space, and it goes out into space, and that's that. So the energy goes in, it gets used either immediately or passed around, but it all goes back out into space. That's how the energy works. It does not get recycled. It goes in and it comes out. It flows through the ecosystem. Now, matter is a little different. Notice there's no matter going in from some new spot. We have one great big circle, and that is it. Okay? And so as a result, we don't get any new matter. When you're an ecosystem, all the matter you have is what's there. And if you don't get any new matter, the only thing to do, the only way to get your chemicals to build your bodies and stuff is to use chemicals that are already there. And unless we have a way to recycle them, we're going to run out fast. Okay? And since we haven't run out, then we must have a way to recycle them. And that's called the all those nutrient cycles we talked about, the carbon cycle, the phosphorus cycle, the nitrogen cycle, the water cycle, they all get recycled. So primary consumers pull in nutrients and stuff from the environment, whether it's nutrients from the soil, water from rainfall that's in the soil, or primarily carbon out of the atmosphere. It pulls it all in, okay, and then it gets used. Yep. A primary consumer either consumes it, so that, like when I ate that apple, not only did I get energy, but I also got stuff from my body to build my body with and maintain it, or they die and the decomposers get it. Okay, and that's what happens at all levels. But the decomposers are interesting because without them, none of this work. It'd be over with a long time ago. These decomposers, look, they're the only ones that actually put it back in. Okay. These guys, I don't know what this arrow means. I don't like this arrow here or here or here, because it all goes to the decomposers, and then the decomposers put it back to create the soil for, guess what, the primary producers to use again. This is the cycling of how the chemicals in an ecosystem work. Energy flows through, in and then out, but the chemicals have to be cycled. They have to be reused and reused and reused, and that's how we do ecosystems. All ecosystems are just this situation. The energy is flowing in and out, and the chemicals are cycling around. Okay. Now, so a food chain can let us see that a little bit. All living things require food to survive. That includes even the plants. Now, plants, of course, they use sunlight as their food, but it is food, right? So the plants are pulling in food, and then something eats them for food, and then something eats them for food, and something eats them for food, all the way, etc. Okay. Each step or link in the food chain is a trophic level, and these are the successive levels we talked about earlier. This is the first level. The successive level past that is this one. The successive level past for that. These are all successive levels. All right. This can show us both energy flow and matter flow. Remember, though, that hidden in between here for the energy is most of the energy comes out and goes back into space. Most of the energy at this level goes back into space. Only about 10% of it goes from here to here. And most of the energy from this level goes out into space, and only about 10% of it goes from here to here and here to here, etc. Same thing with matter. Most of the matter, the chemicals that these organisms use, don't get passed along to the next levels. They're used, and they get decomposed and they go back into the soil, right? So the levels are what we're talking about here. These levels are divided into producers. That's the first trophic level here. Then the consumers, that's all these guys here. And it's not shown here. I couldn't find that good of a picture. But then you got the decomposers. That's all out here, and everything gets eaten by the decomposers. Taking a closer look at this, the feeding positions, that's what trophic levels literally means, is feeding positions. The feeding positions of these things start out with the primary producers. Most of those are photosynthetic, like plants, phytoplankton, algae, and some bacteria. You may think that the plants are the dominant photosynthetic producers in the world, but they're not. It's the phytoplankton in the ocean The phytoplankton in the ocean, if you can imagine the surface of the earth, what, it's 70% of it's covered in water, and most of that's got plankton floating in it, and it is churning it up all day long. It is going through photosynthesis and releasing oxygen all day long. And so as a result, this phytoplankton produces probably most of the oxygen on the earth. Plants are there. There's a lot of plants. They're probably second place, but they're second place to phytoplankton. But we've talked about that process of photosynthesis, how it pulls in carbon dioxide, uses the carbon dioxide in the water to make sugars that build their bodies, and then a byproduct of it is oxygen. Well, take a deep breath and thank you very much, photosynthetic producers. There are some really weird situations, like deep sea hydrothermal vents. Man, there ain't no sunlight down there, and they can't go through photosynthesis, so they don't have sunlight. But coming out of the ground underwater are these hydrothermal vents. There's heat and these chemicals. There's organisms that have evolved the ability to break the bonds in these chemicals and use them as a producer. Okay, so it's an inorganic source, chemicals, and these things have used them. And then so there's down there's these things that eat the chemicals, and there's things that eat the things, and there's things that eat things that eat things, and it's just a whole nother food web down there that is entirely independent of the sun. We've also found them deep inside of caves, and we've even found them underground, like in the water. So, like if you dig down deep enough, you hit water, and sometimes there's caves and stuff down there that are totally full of water, haven't seen the light of day in millions of years, but we find living things there. It is crazy, absolutely crazy that those things exist, and we don't talk about them very much because they're weird and hard to explain. We mostly talk about the photosynthetic ecosystems that run off photosynthetic producers, but there's ecosystems that run off of chemosynthetic producers, and it's weird, really weird. Imagine getting to the bottom of the ocean and sending a camera down there and thinking there ain't nothing down here because there's no sunlight, and all of a sudden something swims by and you're like, whoa. That's because there's chemosynthetic producers down there, and we find them all over the place. It's kind of crazy. All right. The consumer levels start out with the primary consumer. Those are the things that eat the plants, or the primary producers, whatever that is. They're called herbivores. Then you've got the secondary consumers. Those are the things that eat the plants. Then you got your tertiary consumers. Those are the things that eat the things that eat the things that eat the plants. And you got your quaternary. Those are the things that eat things that eat things that eat things that eat the plants. And we can even go higher than quaternary. We can go quinary, septenary, depending. One thing is that a very robust ecosystem can actually maintain these septenary and octenary and nonary, and it can go on. But we're talking about like jungles or coral reefs. Most ecosystems they're not that robust. They don't have that much nutrients. They don't have that much energy available. They freeze half the time because they're in the climates where this freezes, and so they only support tertiary, maybe quaternary levels. Okay. So it's interesting to note that most food chains only go to tertiary, maybe quaternary consumers, but they can. It's also interesting to note they don't have to. Literally, a food chain can consist of producers and decomposers. Remember, there's a decomposer level out here in this whole thing. It can just be producers and decomposers. That's it. That's all that's needed. Okay? But then, sometimes you can throw in a primary consumer, and quite often ecosystems are just that: producers, primary consumers, and decomposers. Then maybe secondary consumers, and then, tertiary and quaternary. It happens. We're accustomed to watching Animal Planet, and we see the ones with these top predators, but they don't have to be. They don't have to be that crazy. They can be very simple. And so, just so you know that, it doesn't have to have all these levels. It can go pretty high, or it can stay very low. It's just depending on the climate, the nutrients available, and all kinds of things like that. All right. Don't forget the decomposers. That's going to be things like the fungus and the bacteria. They complete the food chain. Everything here, all of these stuff, all these producers and consumers, they're going to die. That shark, as tough and bad as he is, one day he's going to die. And then what's left with his body? Does his body just hang around forever? No. His body gets decomposed by the decomposers. And then his body is returned to the nutrients that are stored up in his body. Some of them may have been there for his entire life, but those nutrients are then released back into the, in this case, the aquatic ecosystem, and those are then released, and the primary producers start all over again. But between the dead shark and the primary producers, they're the decomposers, okay? And they release the nutrients. Now, that happens generally on the floor of the ocean in this case, and so the nutrients are at the bottom and the primary producers are at the top. So we rely on flowing water, underwater streams and other types of things that flow to bring the nutrients up off the bottom of the ocean and bring them up to the surface. And it's kind of a crazy situation. The ocean is mostly a desert if you think about it, where there's not much stuff living there. But in the places where the underwater currents pick up all these nutrients and then bring them to the surface, that's an oasis, and that's where we have tons of life. And it's kind of odd, but that happens generally around the warmer areas. Not always, it happens all over the place, but it happens often around the warmer areas where we also have the coral reefs. And so coral reefs are just incredibly biodiverse because they're warm and they have lots of life there, because that's usually where the ocean currents bring the nutrients to, just off the coast of Florida. I mean, that's what we have. They have the what's that current called? It's the Gulf Stream, but it's something else. And the water moves, starting out in Africa. It moves along the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, and when it gets right to Florida right here, it starts to come up to the top, and it brings with it all these nutrients. And so there's tons of producers, and because there's tons of producers, there's a very robust ecosystem. Okay, food chains can be short. In fact, we don't even have to have the owl. We can actually go shorter. We can just have the corn. Okay, a food chain can literally just be corn. Corn grows, corn does its thing, corn dies, and then it's decomposed and returned to the earth, right? That's fairly common, happens all the time. Throw in an extra one like the rat, now you got a 2-linked food chain. Then you can throw in the owl, now you got a 3-linked food chain. You can have a 4-linked or even a 5-linked. And it can even go even higher, 6, 7, 8, something eats the eagle, right? So who knows? But food chains always start with the producers, okay? And almost always those are photosynthetic producers. And the second level is always an herbivore or an omnivore, okay? Now, think about this. Let's see here. I don't see a good omnivore on this page, but there are omnivores that will eat. They'll be primary consumers and secondary consumers, sometimes even third level consumers. Humans are. If you put a human in here, I can eat the carrots, I can eat the rabbit, I can eat the frog, heck, I can even eat the snake, which makes me a 4th level consumer. We don't normally like to eat above the secondary level, but we do, it's just part of it. Here's a food web. Now remember, food webs, remember, food chains show energy flow and matter flow, and the arrows are important because they show you which way it flows, right? The rat, all of its energy came from the corn. A lot of its energy is just going to go away into heat as it decomposes or as it lives its life, but some of that energy is going to go into the owl when the owl eats it. And so that's how energy flows. The same thing with the matter, right? Matter flows through an ecosystem the exact same way. Every bit of this body of the rat came from eating, herbivores. Producers. The rat ate the producers, and every bit of its body, the matter started out in a plant, and then it got there. Same thing for you, by the way. Same thing with the owl. Everything here, the matter started out in a producer, and it just kind of moved its way through, right? And so think about it. Every bit of your body, every bit of matter you've ever had, organic matter, started out as a plant. And you either ate the plant, or you ate the thing that ate the plant, or you ate the thing that ate the thing that ate the plant. So it's just really kind of funny how I look at my foot and I think, man, that might have been a turnip one day, a long time ago. Now, food webs tend to show us not just one possible pathway, because this is one possible pathway, but food webs tend to show us all the possible pathways. Inside of it, you can see food chains, right? So algae to carp to trout to kingfisher, that's one. But there's also algae to prawn to trout to kingfisher, or algae to slug to turtle to, that's the end of it, or algae to slug to, I don't know. But there's all kinds, the waterweed to carp to trout to kingfisher. I don't know, but the point I'm trying to make is that these show all the possible food chains in an ecosystem, is basically what a food web is. And again, same thing. The energy flows through and the matter flows through in the exact same way. All right? And so this is why these things are important. They show us the the way that the matter and the energy flows. The chemicals flow and the energy flows the same way. Remembering that with energy, it either is used here and leaves as a form of heat, or it passes along here and leaves as a form of heat, or it passes along here and leaves as a form of heat. And from one level to the next, there's way less energy available. Of all this energy, only about 10% goes to the next level. Okay. Now, matter is the same way, but at the end of the day, matter is then released to the decomposers, who decompose it and put it back into the producer level. So energy flows through, but matter cycles, as I hope we've explained well. Now, I like this energy pyramid because I don't see it normally drawn upside down like this, but I like it because it kind of shows you, starting from the top and working our way down. When we look at one that's upside down like this, it's hard to think that we start at the bottom and work our way up, but that's how we're going to have to look at it. But this is a good way to start at it. The energy pyramid shows us not only the levels of consumption, but also the available amount of energy, or the available amount of chemicals or matter, and how it flows from top to bottom. Okay, if there's 100% of energy available at the producer level, there's only going to be 10% of that energy available to the primary consumer level, and only 1% to the secondary level. And this is only a three-step food chain. If we go further, then it's 0.1% for the next level, 0.01% for the next level. And think about this fox, okay? This fox has to have all of this land available so that it can raise all these rabbits to keep the fox alive, right? You can't have as many foxes as you have rabbits because you don't have enough food, right? So, if there's another level past the fox, what eats a fox? Let's say a wolf. Wolves eat foxes. Think of all of the foxes you have to have just to keep the wolf alive. Think of all the rabbits you have to keep each fox alive. Multiply that times all the foxes to keep the wolf alive. That's how many rabbits you have to keep the wolf alive. And then think of all of the land you have to keep all the rabbits alive, to keep all the foxes alive, to keep the wolf alive. It takes every time you go up a step here, it takes a lot of energy, a lot of the producer level, to keep the higher trophic levels going. And if you get to the point where you have like a quaternary consumer like this eagle, it takes an immense amount of land. That's why eagles are not as common around the world as, I don't know, bugs, because it takes a lot of land to keep the eagle alive and not so much land to keep the bug alive, right? I mean, how much land does it really take to keep a bug alive? Just a couple of square meters. But when it comes to the eagle, you have to have hundreds of square miles. Hundreds of square kilometers, I should have said. I'm a science teacher, right? Look, the laws of physics apply to ecosystems in regard to the flow of energy and the flow of matter. But right now we're talking about energy. Energy is conserved just like it always is, but energy is lost to heat during the ecosystem process. These trees, these plants live their lives, and energy goes in, they use it, energy comes out, okay? So most of the energy does not go to the next level, as I've said, a dozen times. What energy does go to the next level is small, and then it keeps passing that way. These bugs, they live their lives. Most of the energy they have is used to keep them alive, and it goes away as heat. Right now, heat's coming out of me, right? Even if I wasn't the top on the ecosystem, I am, but if I wasn't the top on the food chain, whatever decided to eat me one day would not get all of the energy I've ever consumed, because most of it goes away to heat. Okay. So if I had 20,000 kilocalories per square meter per year of energy stored here in the producer level, only about 2,000 kilocalories per square meter per year is available to the primary consumer level. Only about 200 kilocalories per square meter per year is available at the secondary level. Only about 20 kilocalories per meter per year is available at the tertiary level, and only 2 kilocalories per year per square meter is available at the quaternary level. Now, when I say kilocalories, that's what you're thinking. These are the calories. Okay, you eat a Twinkie and you get like 30 calories. Well, that's what I'm talking about. That's 20 kilocalories. Or 30 kilocalories is what I'm talking about. So imagine how much you consume in your life and how much land it represents. And we do this by year in this case. So imagine how much food you consume in a year. And if it were all plant-based, how much land would it take to keep you alive? Right? And by the way, when you eat animals, you have to increase the plant space by about 10 times. It takes 10 times more land to keep you alive if you're a secondary consumer as if you're a primary consumer. Vegetarians don't need as much land to keep them alive as people who are totally carnivores, and there are people who simply eat animal products all their lives. Okay, now of course most humans are somewhere in between, so we're not totally vegan, but we're also not totally carnivorous, so we eat somewhere in between. So it takes more land to keep us alive than if we were vegan, but not as much to keep us alive if we were totally carnivores. Okay, this is a much closer look at this, and I'm going to leave it with you, but understand that matter and energy, the black lines represent energy and these colored lines represent matter. But the energy goes in, it's used, and it comes out and it goes away. But the matter has to flow through, and that's what's so important. And understand this, it's the decomposers that take all that matter and return it back to the producer level. And if it weren't for the decomposers, life would have ended on Earth a long, long time ago. Alright, you guys, I'm going to stop right there. Don't know why you're sitting there. Go get to work.